And now, please welcome Senior Diversity and Inclusion Leader, Oracle NetSuite, Devin Cobb.
Let that play. All right, you can turn it off. I like that. They said you can come up with a theme song. I'm like, oh yeah, time to have a party. Welcome, happy Thursday, how many people are having a great SuiteWorld 2022? I'm having a great time. We've been having some great sessions, having great discussions, learning a lot, and today, this session I think is going to be one of the best ones that you've taken part in. Let me tell you a little bit about today. It's going to be a D&I keynote speech by someone we have, and it's being sponsored by Deloitte Digital, all right? But before I get to talking about China, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I am the Senior Diversity Leader for NetSuite, and I've had the privilege of spending time and working with our fearless leader, Evan Goldberg, right? So when I first started talking with Evan about a year and a half ago, we started saying, what does diversity look like? Because diversity is not a class. It's not you go to some class and then now you're certified as a diversity expert. Diversity is a journey. So as I sat down and started talking with Evan, we came up with a couple things. One, we started with data. We look at data from a recruiting standpoint, who's applying for roles, we get to see that data. Then we look at data from a retention standpoint and how do we have representation at different levels of employees. So what does that mean? We put together a very intentional change process. Very intentional change process that focuses on three different things. Intentional diversity recruiting. What does that mean? How do we partner with HBCUs? How do we partner with Hispanic serving institutions? How do we work on internships? Because as much as someone who's doing an internship is learning about us, we want to make sure we're learning about them. That's our recruiting side. Then we put together a plan, say, all right, what does intentional retention look like? Well, when we think about diversity retention, we think about our employee resource groups. We have employee resource groups that helps you build communities. Communities so that people or employees feel that they're a part of something. So we want to make sure we have a very intentional process around employee resource groups. We then say, how do we look at them and find out what motivates them? Think about this, team. In COVID, we have more people working in what? In virtual reality spaces, right? It's a virtual space. So how do we make sure we connect with our talent? So I challenge all of our leaders that we work with to say what motivates the people individually. We know we're going to talk about the business, but how do you motivate people individually? Evan and I have also set up some listening sessions. We've had an opportunity, and it's hard, right, Evan, to just sit there and listen so that people talk to us for an hour, and all we can do is say, thank you. And they tell us what their experience is like. So that's the listening session when we think about retention. The third piece is diversity development. So we're putting together a very intentional development plan so that one, we'll set up some training so that people can learn some new skills. But two, we want to be very intentional in how we're setting up their feedback loop, i.e. mentoring, reverse mentoring, 360s, executive coaches. We're going to put together what is a very intentional process to develop our talent, and then we want to put our talent on special projects so that maybe it's a stretch opportunity. Team, it's a journey. It's a journey. We're a year and a half into it, and I always tell Evan, we're nowhere near the end, and honestly, there is no end, because you're always evolving. So please know that here at NetSuite, we are on our journey, but that's enough about NetSuite. We want to talk about China. It's a bad lady right here. One of the things I heard when I heard the name, I called a friend. I said, hey, China Widener from Deloitte, do you know who she is? He said, I don't know what you guys did, but you got the best person we have to come in and talk about diversity. I said, okay. So when you think about this, China is actually one of our principals at Deloitte Consulting. She has over 15 years of consulting experience spanning industries across sectors. She serves as a technology leader, focused on leading next-gen evolution and virtual economy, and her ability to basically build business transformation, driving adoption of intelligent automation and operations, account leadership, and my favorite thing, she's an executive coach in working with leaders. In addition, she advocates through D&I, working with Deloitte's Global Diversity and Inclusion Council, as well as their Black Action Council. When we think about it, she's also champions Deloitte. She's leading the development of programs designed to acquire, grow, and women in diversity. So team, I want us to take a moment to welcome China and give her a warm welcome to say, hey China, come talk to us.
So first of all, good afternoon. Devin, thank you. We are going to spend a little bit of time together today talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're going to have a framework when you walk out the door. I promise you, you do not need to take copious notes because there will be a summary slide for later if you have such a desire. What I really want you to do is listen to my words. I want you to walk with me for just a little bit of time. And then I think we're going to do some Q&A at some point later, which is always fun. So with that said, the first thing I want you to do, I want everybody in this room to stand up. Put your arms out like this. Here's what I want you to know. Regardless of where you are in your organization, regardless of where your organization is in its maturity, you have a span of touch. It is at the end of your fingertips, and every day you get to make some choices. Now have a seat, because now I want to talk to you about the other two spans that you have that matter greatly. You also have a span of control. Whether you are staff, whether you are management, whether you are the executive, whether you are the CEO, you have a span of control. The other span that you have, the one that is probably most important, is you have a span of influence. What we're going to talk about today, you will be able to execute either within the span of your touch, the span of your control, or the span of your influence. The question you have to ask yourself every day, which one will I execute on today? In which moment will I choose to engage today? The steps to that engagement, what we're going to talk about, but know this, there are small steps that are more impactful than large programs. Are both necessary? Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it is also about reaching as many people as we can reach. But the reality is, it doesn't always require or mean you need to have a massive program. So, with that set up, a couple of things that I want you to sort of understand walking into this. Now, first of all, you are in this room, so I get there's a little bit of choir preaching that's about to happen. But I want to level set us for a second so that we're all singing from the same hymnal, if you will. Here's the deal. There are a few numbers here. I want to talk about them for a second. 4% of Black tech executives. 20 tech executive women. Now, hold on to that for a second, because these other numbers are going to force you to ask yourself why the first two exist. 25, the percentage of profitability increase that occurs when companies have diverse teams. 36 really is then the fact that you're more likely to have higher revenues as a company with diverse teams. 60% better results. If those three things are true, then you have to ask yourself, why only 4% and why only 20? because it means you're leaving profitability on the table. So when we talk about why this matters, it is not just about the virtuosity of it. It is also about the fact that we are in business and we have outcomes and we have growth goals. And if you are not engaging your practitioners, your staff, your team members in a diverse conversation, if you are not engaging them as diverse humans, that walkout song, Shackles, is really about the fact that what people want is the freedom to become their best selves. And if you don't do this, you are in essence shackling them. You are tying them to the ground when they really could do something much more powerful and impactful, not just for themselves, but for your companies, for your business, for your team, for your project. So, having set that stage, this framework we're going to walk through, really there are 5 components that we're going to talk about for the next 19 minutes and 45 seconds. And here's the thing. Again, I want you to think of this in the context of your own capability and capacity, your own desire and interest. You don't have to become something you are not. So for those of you in the room who say, gee, I think about being an ally, but I don't really fill in the blank, I don't really know how, I don't really know who to ally on behalf of, I don't really have relationships for which the affinity might feel authentic, let me tell you this. You don't ever have to declare your allyship. Great if you do, but not required. What's required is action. We all sit in meetings every day, and we know that sitting in those meetings that we see things happen that our head, our heart, or our gut do not like. And we don't say anything. You want to be an ally? Say something. It doesn't require you to carry a sign, wave a flag, or any of those other things. All it requires you to do are small things. Like ask the person who literally has been trying to say something for 5 minutes, but has been talked over. To say, gee, Gwen, you look like you have something to say. That is a small thing to do, but what it does for Gwen and what it does for everyone in the room is gives her space to state whatever opinion it is that she has. Because being present and being seen matters. So it doesn't require you to suddenly become an expert. If you want to, great. It doesn't require you, however, to declare something as a major philosophical statement. If you want to, awesome. But it does require you to act. Now, when we think about this in the context of an entity, the question always becomes, where do we go? What do we do? How do we start? Gee, there are organizations at the end of the spectrum where the conversation alone is a challenge. There are organizations that have poured time, talent, and treasure, resource into this who are evolved. And you look at some of the evolved and you say, well, I can't get there. Well, you don't have to get there. And oh, by the way, they didn't get there overnight either. They got there by starting somewhere. So let's talk about that. First, you have to align on definition and need. What are we talking about really in the context of your organization? Because what it means at my organization and what it means at your organization might quite honestly not be the same thing. By virtue of our history, our organic DNA of how the organization came to be, the drivers that matter to the organization. And so what you really have to do is be thoughtful about aligning on that definition. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Diversity is more than gender and race. There's a concept of intersectionality. So here's a simple example. I'm a black woman, lesbian, mother of 2 who rides a motorcycle and bakes. I am number 7 of 8, and 4 of my siblings, my son and my niece, are all career military. If you don't think that all of her doesn't show up when I show up, I don't leave any part of her at home. I can't dissect the part of me that appreciates and understands the military sacrifice any more than I can dissect the part of me that shows up as a lesbian, any more than I can dissect the part of me that shows up as a mom. When you get me, you get all of her. Diversity is more than just gender and race. And oh, by the way, I have a niece who's deaf and a nephew with no legs. So when I show up and see people who are differently abled, that shows up too. We are the sum of our experience. We are the sum of our parts. And the reality is, if we only think about it two-dimensionally, we will only do two-dimensional things. So the notion of diversity and the definition, how you think about that, what that means, how you're going to interpret it as an organization matters. This notion of equity and equality, they are different. One is about access and the other about treatment. You have to decide, do you have an access problem in your organization? Do you have a treatment problem in your organization? Maybe it's not a problem at all. You do well, you want to do better. Again, definitions matter, because ultimately what you want people to rally around is a common understanding of what success will look like. This notion of inclusion, it's about value and voice. Part of the reason I have been at Deloitte as long as I have is because the day I showed up, I had a voice. Now, people don't always agree with me, to be clear. And really, they probably shouldn't always agree with me, but they always listen to me. I'm okay if what you say to me is, I hear you, I disagree, and I'm making a different decision. But if you don't hear me at all, and you don't see me at all, we have a different problem. So understand that inclusion is about participation. It is about the capacity for the person in the room to believe that if they weren't there, something would be missing. That if they weren't there, there would be some value lost to the group. And the only way they know that is if the group actually reinforces the fact that they provide value. The way we do that is we look each other in the eye. We talk to one another. There are thousands of people here. We always smile at the people we know, but what do you do about the people you don't? Small things matter. I have walked into rooms where literally nobody has looked me in the face until they figured out I was there for a set purpose. Until somebody said, oh, do you know who this is today to do X, Y, or Z thing? But it shouldn't require that. The human condition suggests that you should be able to see me just because I am here. So when we talk about inclusion, what we're talking about is exactly that. It could be as simple as, what is your company's practice around meetings? Are there pre-meetings before the meeting to talk about the meeting? Who do you include in the pre-meeting? When you walk into the room and there are people in the room you don't know, do you have a default culture that says people actually engage the people who are not known? Or do you just walk past them to the people that you know? It isn't always about a massive program. It is sometimes simply about human interaction. So, have a definition and define what you need to change. Because if you don't have some definition around what you believe you need or want to change, then all change will do. Now, let's talk about assessing those needs. You heard Devin talk about data. It's all about the data, and the data is really important because if you don't baseline it, you have no idea how much progress you've made, if any or none, if what you're doing is working or not. So yes, you absolutely need to have data. You also have to make sure that in the process of that, you have to actually assess the conditions that you want to change and really understand what's driving the current condition. Because, oh, by the way, you might be surprised. So here's an example of that kind of surprise. When you think about leaders, most of us think about people who are at an executive level, whatever that means in your particular organization. Now, all of the sudden, what you realize, and we discovered this for ourselves, which is leaders is every single human who leads a project team. They might be straight out of business school. They might be a newly minted supervisor of some sort. But here's what we know. Everybody who leads someone else has a tremendous impact on that person's career trajectory. Who do you focus your training on today? Are you actually training the people who are impacting people in your organization on a daily basis? Or are you reserving it for what you believe to be leaders because we need to make sure our leaders all know? But if you think about how your organization operates, who's providing that feedback on a daily basis? Is that coming truly from the higher parts of your organization, or is that happening amongst people who lead teams of 3 or 4? Understanding what the need really is, and therefore who you might need to educate and inform, you might be surprised if you do those assessments to really understand where its origin is coming from. So you have to assess it. You also have to assess something very important. And I'm going to spend a couple extra seconds here because this really matters. Are you solving a structural problem? Structure, think culture and ideology for your organization. Are you talking about an institutional challenge? That's about organizational practice and policy. Third option is systemic, and that really is about what is embedded. Do you have embedded disparity? Do you have a history that you carry? When I was a prosecutor, I did some other things before these 15 years of consulting, and one of them was that I was a prosecutor for a period of time. And the simple truth is, when I took on that role, I was the second Black prosecutor in that office. And at the time I took on the role, a lot of people came up to me and said, "How did you get that job?" And I said, "I don't know what you mean. I applied. I sent a cover letter and a resume, and I said, hey, I'm going to be in town over this period of time. I'd love to talk to you all if you're interested." And so they said, sure, and I did, and then they offered me a job, and I took it. Like, I don't know what you're asking me. In the history of that office, there had not been 2 at a time. And this was in 1990-something. And so it just had not occurred. Now, I don't know if it didn't occur because somebody deliberately decided it shouldn't happen, or if it didn't occur because urban legend was they never have 2, so why would I apply? My point here is that there are embedded historical, sometimes legendary, things that people believe to be true. So they don't apply for the role, they don't ask the question, and if you don't destroy those myths, if you don't break those urban legends, then even if you build the right program, even if you create the right opportunity, you might not actually have anybody participate because they believe it's beyond them no matter what you tell them, because the urban legend is stronger. So keep that in mind. So when you are assessing the need, it's not just what problem do you want to solve, it's understanding, is that problem systemic, is that problem institutional, is that problem structural? Because they're going to have very different solutions. And please don't try to solve them all at once. Pick one and have some real success, and then pick another. Okay, you got to learn and you got to start. So you've assessed it, you got to do something. Action here is critical. Visible action, even more critical. If you tell me you love me, but you don't show me, I'm going to have a hard time believing the opportunity is real. The same thing holds true for all of the people that work with you. You can tell them what you intend, but if you don't create an opportunity and a pathway, if you don't actually have results that look different this year than they did last year, then the reality is they will be empty words. And here are some things that we know. For instance, there's a statistic that says that African Americans and Hispanics change jobs in technology more frequently than non-Black, non-Hispanic individuals. How much more frequently? 3.5 years versus 5.2. You know why we're changing jobs and leaving? Because people don't believe the opportunity is real. And they believe the only way to grow is they have to go somewhere else. They have to find the next opportunity. So starting somewhere, you do not have to bite off more than you can chew, as they proverbially say. You can start small. For some of you in this room, your organization's starting point might actually just be dialogue. It may be as simple as saying, we are going to have an open and honest conversation about the diversity and inclusion component of our business. That is an important start. It might be that your organization is in a place where it is now time to move from individual one-on-one coaching or mentoring into something that is more programmatic, because what you really need to do is move the needle on what your executive rank looks like. And you're not going to do that on a per person basis, because there are skills that need to be acquired that require time, and there are a lot of things you can substitute, but you cannot substitute time. And people need time to have experience, and therefore you have to start early in order to produce at some point the outcome that you want. You have to know where you are on the spectrum, and you have to then take the right next step in order to achieve that. Which brings you to progress. You take the step, you've done the work, you've figured out where you want to start. Maybe that is about acquisition. Maybe it's about retention. Maybe it's about growth. They are different, oh, by the way. Having a population that is, I'll make up a number, 27% diverse is great. Is it the same 27%? Is it made up of the same people who were here last year? Or are you just churning people through like a washing machine? So yes, it's 27%, but it's a whole new 27%. Growth is the 27% becomes 29%, and 80% of those people are still with you, which is different than just being here, right? So you have to figure out what it is that you are going to, listen, we all respond to things that get measured. For those of you in public companies, you know what a quarter is. You live and die by it every day. Somebody's asking you if you hit the number. Good things happen when you do, less good things happen when you don't. This is no different than that. You have to review and measure the progress. You have to be able to understand how much progress you've made. And oh, by the way, the most important thing is to understand why you didn't, and then make the adjustment. And now, at every discussion I have, somebody says, how do you make it matter? We are all very much, Pavlov had it right the first time. We respond to positive reinforcement. You have to reward people who are doing what you've asked them to do. You might have consequence for those who do not. If you don't make it part of how you evaluate those individuals in your organization, it will fall to the bottom of the list, because people will prioritize that upon which they are evaluated. Tie it to my evaluation in some form, I will pay attention to it. Now, that does not mean you wake up on Tuesday next week and suddenly tell everybody they have a new diversity goal in their evaluation. And if you fail to meet it, your bonus will be impacted. That is not what I'm suggesting to you. What I am suggesting to you is that there's an evolution to bring people along to understand it is part of how you evaluate. Because treatment of people, and we are all right now, I suspect, equally challenged with what the reality is of the employment market. Something happened with the pandemic. And what we know, absolutely know quantitatively, is that women and minorities have not come back to pre-pandemic levels. So, one means that you have to show up in a way that provides people with some measure in whatever your evaluation process is, in order to start them on the journey. But you have to meet them where they are. So an immediate penalty for failure to participate is not the right answer. Being clear about the behavioral action you want them to take is. And whether that is coaching or mentoring or participation or program creation, whatever it is, should be commensurate with their own span of responsibility and influence. If I am a newly minted in my world partner, I probably should be coaching 5 or 6 people outside of, right, the people I am otherwise responsible for an evaluative basis. But if I'm a more senior partner, I should actually be driving something more programmatic so that I can reach and touch more people, because I have more influence and capability and span of control to do that. Don't ask people on the front line of your organization to do things that belong to the executive branch. And don't ask people sitting in an executive seat, don't allow them to only do those things that you would expect would come from frontline engagement. Because if you do, you are putting the onus on people who can't actually create the outcome you're looking for, and you're letting people off the hook who can. So it has to be commensurate with their level and their responsibility. And if you do that, what will happen at that point is that you will make progress, and then you can take your next step. Because at the end of the day, and I think Devin started here with, it's a journey. It absolutely is. And that journey is really an evolution. Because the simple truth is, we are talking about people, and which means every next generation of them are moved by a different set of discussions and philosophies and priorities. And therefore, when we talk about this in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what is diverse will look different. What is equitable will look different. Inclusion will look different, because ultimately we are talking about the evolution of people inside organizations, and in order for the organization to evolve, the people have to evolve. If the people are different from one generation to the next, what's required will also be different. So no, you don't finish this particular race. But what you can do is prepare every subsequent next generation of leader to run their version of it as they continue to move forward and progress. So I know that we are getting close to our close, I do believe. And I think we're going to have a really fun conversation, Devin. So you want to come on up here, and we can have think of this as being the fly on the wall of a conversation with 2 friends that you normally don't always get to see.
First of all, am I hot? All right. First of all, can we give her a quick hand? I went from being a co-presenter to I was a fan cheering her on, listening. I'm like, wow, she's impacted. Let's have a seat. Let's go through some questions. We talk about this like, well, what does good look like? So in your eyes, what does good look like, and how would this impact our listening audience?
Good looks like progress from where you are. So again, if your organization does not have any comfort with this conversation publicly inside its 4 walls, right? I don't expect anybody to go stand on a street corner and start talking about diversity. That's not what I mean. But in your lobby, now I know we're not all physically back together again, but on your Zoom call, in the moments while you're waiting for the 3 people to show up who are chronically late, what conversation are you having? If somebody raises a conversation about something they read or saw or heard or happened to them, is there comfort in that dialogue? Right? Good looks like the capacity to do that if it's something you can't do today. So good is defined as any progress that moves your organization forward in its own maturity, your team forward in its own maturity. That's what good looks like. There's no sort of, I would argue, there will be people who disagree, but I don't think you can say there is this sort of objective, independent scale that says you were only good if you were here.
Yes, definitely. Okay. Okay, I'm learning. I don't know about you guys, but I'm picking up a lot. So let me ask for, and this is more for the audience, smaller organizations. So we talk about scale. So we have a smaller org. How do you build it and make it scalable for a smaller organization? Deloitte and Oracle and NetSuite is so large. What does that look like for a smaller organization or even a department?
Yeah. So that's why the whole conversation about span of control at the very start, because you only need to impact that which you can reach. And so whether you are an organization of 100 or 100,000, it's really relative. So if I'm leading a team of 5 people, right, the question is, do those 5 people feel inclusive? Do they feel like they are included, right? Are they clear about the priority? Are they clear about, do they all have a voice and an opportunity to speak at the table? Everybody in here, everybody, myself included, we all have that one person we go to. You might have 2, but you also, many of you, I won't say all, have the one person where you're like, Lord Jesus, please don't make me have to talk to them today. And here's what happens. When you are, and I use physical body response to signal me to behave differently. When I am in a circumstance where I say, they are going to start to talk, and I realize I have to fix my face, I realize I'm not being inclusive, okay? Now, and so, you know, if you are from the South, it's, bless you, child, right? But here's the thing, and while I say that, you know, and it's a little bit funny, understand what you're also doing to that person, though. Because they also can read your face and your body language, too. And they know they're working on your last nerve. And sometimes they are still willing to take the chance to tell you what they're telling you. And it may, frankly, or may not be valuable. But at the end of the day, if you are leading that team of people, you have a responsibility to hear them, too. And so whether we're talking about leading 5 people, right, and making sure those 5 people have diversity in some form or fashion, whatever that is, making sure that there is inclusion for those 5 people, making sure that you are being equitable and treating them similarly, a la equality, absolutely can occur. You don't, again, have to have a massive program to say we are being equitable today, but you can absolutely understand that your behavior and engagement, how you lead them, can contribute to their sense of inclusion and value, which is what at its core we're talking about.
Love it, love it. So, I mean, when I think about this, you and I both agreed it's a journey, right?
Absolutely.
So as you go on this journey, how do you ensure, whether it's a small organization, large organization, ensure it's not a check the box exercise?
So here's the dirty little secret. For some people in the beginning, that is what it will be. Know it, understand it, leverage it. So part of this is about changing the cultural underpinning of your organization to align with where you believe it should, can, ought, need to be. That requires collective agreement amongst the people that make up the organization. Sometimes what you have to do first is educate people. Some people will resist education about anything. That's okay, because what you don't change is the required outcome. So even if my participation is compliance, right, over commitment, sometimes in the beginning that's okay. Because if you get compliance, you get behavior change. Practiced behavior change becomes culture. So please don't expect that just because you may have been enlightened in some way, shape, form, or fashion by the last 30 minutes, that when you go back, everybody else is going to be immediately enlightened too as soon as you tell them about it. That's not how enlightenment happens. But what you can do is say to Bob, we are going to make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak, so I need you to stop cutting Sally off. And when Bob does or doesn't do that, as the case may be, you then can have a conversation with Bob about Bob's capacity to communicate well. And then Bob will either communicate better,
right,
or there'll be some natural and logical consequence because he didn't.
So when we talk about behaviors and showing up, I know one of the things we focused on in NetSuite was focusing on the leaders. We started with leaders. A ton of time spent with Evan at Goldberg and his leadership team. I mean, really taking them on their personal journey. For our audience, when you talk about leaders, as they go on their journey, what are some things they might want to start doing and some things they may want to avoid?
So it is important for leaders to be bought into and supportive of. And support is time, talent, and treasure. Sometimes, from some leaders, what you need is their willingness to make the investment, right? Because budgets are what budgets are, right, at the end of the day. Sometimes you need leaders to be visibly present,
Yes.
right? And sometimes you need leaders who will simply give you the latitude to move forward. You have to know what that looks like in your own organization.
Definitely.
How does your organization, on anything that matters to it, how does leadership show up? Whatever that looks like in your organization is how you want it to look on this topic as well. Because at some point you want this to move from what I call patchwork to weave. You want it to move from being a thing outside the norm to being part of the fabric, to being a strand that makes up the tapestry, not a patch that you've put on it.
Yes.
So and it's a conversation we've had lots of times, which is how do we move this out of special designation status into and embedded in the things in terms of how we operate?
How we embed it, I mean, that means so much because it then leads to culture.
Right.
Like what we're embedding in our culture. And one of the things we ask is, how do people show up being authentic? And that's always the question, right? How does someone show up being authentic and then being an authentic ally? What does that look like? So it's not, once again, check the box.
Well, authenticity is about your head, your heart, and your gut all being in alignment. When they're in alignment, you are authentically showing up as yourself. We have all had the moment where we've sat at the table and we've thought about saying, felt a certain way, observed a certain thing, and get that where you kind of have to move your shoulders a little bit, or you drink, you take a drink because if you put the cup to your mouth, then the mouth won't open, or you we all have a moment where we go, that was not quite right, and we didn't say anything about it, right? Yeah. Our own authenticity in showing up is that alignment. When those things are in alignment, you are being who you are engaging the way that you are. Now, I want to say something here that is really, really, really critical. Mm-hmm. An authentic conversation, particularly around this topic, means you have to be willing to hear and engage in the other person who might authentically show up and say, I don't get it, and maybe even, I don't care. Because you can't be inclusive only about that which you agree with.
100%.
You can't have an organization where authenticity exists if people can't authentically show up with their differing opinions. Now, that's different from tolerating behavior that is inconsistent with the culture, the desired culture. You cannot get it, but that doesn't mean you don't get to be disrespectful, 100%. Or rather you get to be disrespectful. You cannot understand it, but it doesn't mean that you get to be offensive in the way you inquire and ask questions. So understand, not everybody will agree, nor will everybody immediately understand, for a whole litany of reasons. You can absolutely embrace what people don't know and help them. And for some organizations, it is as simple as, here's a reading list.
Yes.
Because, oh, by the way, if I'm going to read, what should I read? And oh, by the way, not everything written is written equally well or equally accurately.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys. I'm learning a lot. right? and while it's a great conversation we're having, I want to open it up a little bit so that you can ask questions, because you and I might sit here and talk well into the evening. We might miss Nelly.
Well, this is true.
I ain't trying to miss Nelly. I got my Air Force Ones. But you know what, though? First, let me, I do want to shift to the audience. And I want to bring up Ranga Bolda, who's our VP Field Engagement Marketing, who's going to assist us.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And if you guys, have you guys seen Ranga around the session this week? He's been sporting those hats.
I gotta have a different hat. It became a pandemic style, and you know, it's been fun. Well, pleasure to be here. I'm run marketing here at NetSuite. Been here for 12 years, and also as part of that journey, I'm part of the Diversity Council, and serving as part of our journey as well.
Don't you have some good news about the Diversity Council and our journey?
Well, yeah, I guess I do. Devin has asked if I would serve as one of the executive sponsors for one of our pillars. So I agreed to do that, and so I'll be doing that moving forward. So thank you, Devin.
So real quick, Ron, can I have the process so that the asking questions? Because I know we have people that.
Yeah, we want you to ask questions. So obviously here in the room, if you want to ask a question, we've got a mic in the middle. Now, I realize it's a mic in the middle and you got to like stand up and be there. But you can also go to the SuiteWorld app here in the room and and you can actually submit your question via that process. If you're listening to this, you can also submit the question directly there in the app as well. So we'd love to hear from you. Love to see what questions you have for China or for Devin actually. And if you submit those questions, that's why I'm holding my phone, so I can see what questions come in, or if anyone is willing or brave enough to ask a question, we'd love to hear from you.
We got someone in the spotlight.
All right.
I love it.
Hi, my name is May. I have a question for China. So diversity to me is having an organization representative of the society that I live in. However, how do you measure success in recruitment for underrepresented minorities when a common obstacle is not having a pipeline of applicants that represents the world that we live in?
So this is a common problem, right? And part of this is about, we've had to rethink, first of all, where we're looking for the talent we need. If you pick up the same rock, you're going to find the same things underneath it. If everybody's vying for the only 6 black students at fill-in-the-blank university, right, you're never going to get all 6, so you're never going to move the needle. So you have to expand the aperture of where you find people with the skills that you need, and then you have to show up to those institutions, to those entities, and you actually have to tell them that's who you're coming for. Because the reality, back to my urban legend conversation earlier, a lot of times, in particular, minority groups don't believe, they believe that what they see is an exception, not a rule. That, oh, that one person got there, that one person made the journey. And so part of it is actually about communicating that you are trying, that you are seeking, that you are looking for. And I know there's always the federally required statement at the end of every posting that says, diverse women and minorities are welcome to apply. Yes, but if you actually show up and engage wherever these people are, whatever program you might be recruiting from, whatever certification program that you engage in, and actually actively engage, what you then get is a bigger application pool. Because otherwise people don't always assume that you mean them, right? So you have to actually tell them that I mean you, I want you to come and apply, right? And then your application pools change. And the reality is, there is a calculation problem, because the simple truth is the number of people going into these programs, the number of people going into college are less than what the general makeup of society looks like. The society is 14% black, but we only have 6% of people who have STEM degrees, and ergo, you're going to have a problem. You're never going to have 14% because that's not, the pipeline isn't 14% deep. So if you really want to be impactful and futuristic, you have to daisy chain all the way back so that you change the actual pipe itself, not just wait for whatever has made it through the gauntlet to grab your, that individual at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, May. If you've got other questions, we'd love to see them. Put them in via the app if you don't want to go up. China, I do. There's someone coming up. I do have a question for you that I was thinking as you were talking. What's been your biggest challenge as part of your own personal journey at Deloitte, as Deloitte's gone through this diversity inclusion journey? Oh,
that's a good question. Probably I'm impatient, right? We are our DNA, right? If you think about it, we're auditors and we are accountants, right? That's what we were first. And so when I earlier talked about understand the DNA of your organization, where did it spring from? Those vestiges are those vestiges, right? So what's the level of risk tolerance that exists in your organization? You have to know what that is. And so for me, it's about go faster. I come from a world that says go big or go home. I am a risk-embracing human from, in every aspect of my life. And so for me, being patient and recognizing that everybody else isn't as risk tolerant is the hardest part.
Was that a challenge with the motorcycle too?
Yeah, see, what can I tell you? I try to do better. I'm older now.
Right.
Well, this is a great and brave conversation, so kudos to NetSuite for actually having this conversation. So I was thinking about the young people that you were talking about, how they were leaving companies in the first 3 or so years. What advice would you give these young professionals? I have one at home that left Dell for this sort of the same reason.
Yeah, so here's the thing for all of us who are navigating the youth.
That's the correct word we can use.
Yeah, see, there you go. So mostly they are collectively have an interesting driver among them. One of those things is about purpose. And you have to be clear that there is a purpose because they want that. You also have to be clear that there's opportunity. All of us stay anywhere where we believe next is possible and I don't have to wait for somebody to die to have it. So making sure that your more junior practitioners, right, understand, one, there is really opportunity, and two, pulling them into, you have to make people a part of something. Stickiness doesn't occur from watching the outside. Stickiness occurs from being on the inside, the meeting, the conversation, the engagement. And when they don't feel that, they just move on to the next person that promises them the next rung on the next ladder, right? That you'll have access and opportunity, because they aren't promising the actual rung. Nobody can do that. But here we grow X, here we do Y. And so it's really about making sure that they understand what those options are, where they are, and being able to demonstrate that there are people who in fact are very successful doing the very thing you're telling them is possible.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Nisha.
Hi, Nisha.
And the question I have is, how do you respond to people who say not having equal opportunity is something of the past? And right now, everybody's moved on. We live in a new world where, everything is equal, and don't play the victim card, or this is just the new trend, and you're just doing this to get attention.
Need some water?
I might need to take a drink. There are a multitude of responses because it comes up in a multitude of ways, right? And we know that there have been studies where people have said, particularly as it relates to the technology industry, do we believe we've done enough, we've done too much, or we haven't done enough? And some of that data tells us that there are significant cohorts of people who believe we've done enough. I say look left and look right. I don't need data to tell me what my eyes can verify for me. Look at the tables that you're around. And so when I've been in circumstances, and I've had a few where people have said, well, I think we've done enough. And I go, really? Who's sitting around this table? Does it even reflect the makeup of your organization? Forget the world at large. If you simply think about the makeup of your organization, do your tables generally reflect the composition of your organization? If the answer is no, then there's probably more work to be done. And oh, by the way, it is always easy to say we've done enough, but my question is always, so when the table looked really different, were we doing too much the other way? Because I'm just trying to understand where we are. There are always going to be people, ultimately, who feel that way because they're looking at the world through a zero-sum lens, and it's not a zero-sum game. The pie gets bigger, there's more opportunity for everybody, right? And having a diverse population creates better outcomes and solutions. We literally know that from data. Better outcomes and better solutions means a bigger pie. So, do you not want a bigger pie? Because that's really what you're talking about. And really, I mean, at the end of the day, you will have to decide. Some people are not going to be interested in hearing any conversation different than that. So you'll have to decide whether it's worth having or not.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for that question. I think it's really the last. Oh, was there
one more?
Was there one more? Yeah. Last question, so go ahead.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. I'm curious because I absolutely think as corporations we have an obligation. But where do you see the obligation for the government and specifically K-12 in helping to have this dialogue? Because I don't think it's 100% the responsibility of corporation. I think systemically we've had a lot of issues, especially in K-12. I'd love for you to speak on that and also maybe from a perspective of legislation.
So here's the caveat. I'm not an educator, right? And I'm not a legislator. But I will put this in this context. In 1978, I was 13 and part of the first class of students to desegregate the Cleveland public school system. I say that to you because it has not been that long ago, because I'm not that old. We tend to think these things were then, at some point before us, but it isn't before us. In some places, it's still us, and it's us right now. So yes, do we need to do something about K through 12? Absolutely. Because if you want to, the pipeline conversation about applicants starts when they're 4. We absolutely know, unequivocally we know, 0 to 5, that literally the highways that are created in the brains of children from 0 to 3 and 0 to 5 set the stage for their capacity going forward. It doesn't mean they can't learn more or learn different, but it absolutely means if we don't make that investment early, we pay for it on the back end. So do we need to do something about K through 12? Absolutely we do. And oh, by the way, it's the same challenge that it exists as it relates to getting people to understand the benefit of the cost of preventive medicine. We have to do early education differently if we want post-education to be different. Legislation is always a tricky animal because the compromise that comes from it usually dilutes its core purpose or delays it because there are so many voices. And unfortunately, because we live in a time right now where, for reasons I do not understand and frankly refuse to embrace, we are so diametrically opposed to anything that it's almost impossible to reach an effective agreement on something. And so while it matters and it's important because it is truly our governance structure and it is how we do things at a government level, And we absolutely, therefore, can't ignore it and need to absolutely try to make sure that legislation that's occurring, like our voices get heard in that. We should not avoid it. We also, at the same time, have to recognize corporate America's responsibility isn't to everybody, but it's absolutely to the people it employs. And if it does that, there is a cascading effect that occurs because people move from one purpose to another. Some people leave corporate America and go into government. Some people leave government and go into corporate America. So these are wicked problems for which no single owner exists. They are ecosystem challenges, but all ecosystems are still made up of humans. And so humans have to start somewhere. So we should all lobby for investments in K-12 because, oh, by the way, we're also all getting older, and at some point, those children are going to be responsible for us. And we need them to be bright.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, China. One last question, really. I mean, for everyone that's in the audience today, what's the one thing you want them to take away from the session today?
If you do nothing else, engagement to humans is the one thing you take away from here. If you walk into a room tonight, y'all going to a concert?
Yes,
you're going to be hanging out in the lobby before they open the doors? Say something to somebody who looks different than you would have said something to before. If you just do that a little bit every day, the planes you will get on to go home, when you sit next to the person and, now, listen, I'm the first one who want to work on a plane, and please don't talk to me, but I also understand that this is how we process information. It's human. It's not that we are expected to simply not see the differences. Instead, embrace them. Don't be afraid of them. Engage them. Now, to be clear, you will find that will be sometimes pleasant, and other times not so much. And that's okay, because the point here is active engagement. If you actively engage, it becomes practiced behavior. Practiced behavior becomes natural defaulting behavior. You can build the muscle memory, and if you build the muscle memory with the people around you, those people will build the same muscle memory. Because, oh, by the way, don't mistake for a second that your teams don't watch who you talk to when you walk into a room.
Thank you for that, China. And thank you, Devin. And thank you for this amazing session. So please join me. A round of applause.
Thank you.
So, team, for everyone, just real quick, once again, thank you again, China. It's been a pleasure working and partnering with you. Definitely. And we're going to stick around. If there's other questions you want to come up, please come up so we can field some questions from you, and hope to see you back. Appreciate it. Everyone take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike's going to come up and take the mics off.
Welcome back to the studio.